All right, welcome everybody around the world. Welcome to all my subscribers. So, for this video here today, I've got some astounding revelations to share with everybody, an amazing discovery. It is definitely unheard of. You will not have heard it before. Nobody else is talking about it, primarily because I discovered it. I talk about it in my book. It's one of the 7 pillars of prophecy that are from God in the Bible that highlight when the end of days will be. So today what I'm going to do is talk about this amazing prophecy from Isaiah because it connects over to Revelation, it connects to Hosea, and altogether it confirms and proves that the end of days will be occurring with 2024 this year. So at some point during the year, maybe just after, we're not going to fuss, but 2024 should be the year. So very quickly, this book here of mine, which is available on Amazon, 7 pillars of scriptural proof, like it says. These are 7 prophecies from the Bible where God is telling us about when the end of days would come. He's giving us hints to solve when the end of days would come. Okay, and also in each of these 7, he gives us a period of time with numbers, i.e., how long. Okay, so in each of those 7 prophecies, okay, they all point towards and work together. They corroborate and back one another up. Some of them even connect over to each other. They point towards these years. Now, 2023 is obviously past. 2024 should be it. And again, I'll say this because it's very important. Jesus warned us that the end will come suddenly. He compared it to the days of Noah, where it will come suddenly. He compared it to the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, where it will come suddenly. And he also said that people will be having peace and surety, claiming peace and surety, and there will be sudden destruction. There will not be some, magical 7 years, mythological 7 years of buffer zone where you're going to be able to just, have clues that the end is coming because it's going to be some tribulation period with an antichrist. All those church myths and everything have deluded people from Satan. So these delusions from Satan have deluded people. The end will come suddenly and without warning. That's the reality. And if the end is coming in 2024 or just after, it's critical that people understand the valid and biblical reasons why we should be aware and believe in this. Okay, so while today for this video I'm focusing only on one of the 7, I urge everybody to go get the book, to study it, and to read it. It's available around the world, has international copyright. But get this book, help share it, lend your copy out, read it to people. Just don't misquote it by accident. Okay, the world needs to hear this information. Every church should be teaching this. Okay, it's critically important. So the evidence that I have here today, focusing on this 1 pillar of prophecy from Isaiah, is about the cup of wrath. Okay, this cup of God that he has and talks about throughout the Bible, which is the cup of his anger, his fury, his wrath. Okay, so all the elements here today tie into this concept, okay, this cup of wrath. Now, the amazing thing is that out of all the other 7 amazing prophecies from the Bible that highlight when the end would be, not all of them, some of them do, but not all of them stand alone. Right? Now, the prophecy of Daniel does, one of the 3 prophecies from the book of Daniel does stand alone. The chronology, which is not really in itself a prophecy, but the chronology, the total sum of 6,000 years, that's all accounted for in chapter 1 of my book. That pinpoints 2024 as well. There's a few that stand alone, but in terms of a true, home run hitter standalone, where you could tell it to a non-believer and they'd be like, oh, wow, well, that sounds pretty amazing. I don't think a biblical chronology necessarily would win anybody over. You got the prophecy of Daniel, which is a standalone, the one from chapter 12. And the other one is the one from Isaiah that I'm covering here today. Now, this standalone evidence is so remarkable. Okay, the beauty of it is it's far more simple to explain than the very complex prophecy of Daniel, which gets into the beast kingdoms and periods of history and covers a lot of history. Okay, This little presentation here is very simple. It's all about the cup of wrath that God has. Okay, so I have a little document here that I've prepared for everybody with some basic bullet point short notes of my own that I'll just verbally read, and the rest is just verses. Okay, it's only about 2 pages of verses and so forth, so it's not going to take too long to get through. And in this run of the live stream, I'm going to try to cut out my waffling in between. Okay, so to start off, I have to break the ice and lay a foundation and show people in the Old and the New Testament a verse example of where God uses this word terminology, this illustrative symbolism of the cup of his wrath. Okay, so from Jeremiah 25:15, it says, "For thus said God of Israel unto me, take the wine cup of this fury out of my hand, and thou hast caused all the nations to drink it unto whom I am sending thee." And next in Revelation 14:10, he also shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God that has been mingled unmixed in the cup of his anger, and he shall be tormented in fire and brimstone, and so forth. Okay, so these are 2 quick examples, this icebreaker laying the foundation, Old and New Testament example, where God uses this terminology, and there's many other examples, okay, where he's talking about this cup of wrath. Okay, it's just a metaphor. It's not a physical, real thing, but it represents his anger. When he dispenses his anger and pours out his anger, his fury, his wrath, his punishment on a nation, that's what it's symbolized as. Okay, now, the amazing thing is I'm about to show you all a startling connection between the cup of wrath verses, okay, which you can see in different places in the Bible, and Israel, okay, and the end of days. There is an astonishing connection here that pinpoints 2024 as the end. Okay, so next, I'm going to show some verses here very quickly, some examples that prove that on the final days, so when the end days arrive, Jesus has arrived, the final trumpet, the 7th trumpet is blown, Jesus is arriving in the heavens, the resurrection is occurring, all the other fantastic, amazing, and sometimes even menacing things are taking place in the earth, right? When all this is taking place, all right, that's what we're talking about when I say the final day, all right? So this cup of wrath is being poured out as the cup of wrath is done over a long period of time. And it finishes its pouring out. So its final drop finishes pouring out. It culminates, it terminates, it finishes on this final day, okay? And this is the worst of them all. So it's like they're saving the worst of it for the very last drops. And then sploosh, it all comes to the end. It's all finished and poured out and finished and done. Okay, so in Revelation 16:19, and it came the great city into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations did fall. And Babylon the Great was remembered before God to give to her the cup of the wine of the wrath of his anger. Okay, as we all know, that Babylon, the mystery Babylon, Babylon the Great, is destroyed along with the rest of the earth and all the stuff that happens in this final day, right? So the cup of the wine of the wrath of his anger, says it right there in Revelation 16:19, okay? Now in Revelation 18, there are 4 verses, verses 4, 6, 8, and 10 that I'll read from here, okay? Again, in same fashion to show that on this final day, this cup of wrath is poured out, okay? And it's poured out upon this specific nation, okay? The mystery Babylon. So it says in verse 4, and I heard another voice out of the heavens saying, come forth out of her, my people, that ye may not partake with her sins, and that ye may not receive of her plagues. Okay, this is a reference to the rapture when the worthy who have been resurrected and translated, when all the worthy are redeemed and ascended up off the earth. Okay, that's what I mean by rapture, and this is a reference to that. Okay, we know that takes place on the final day. And again, this is what's taking place here. But in verse 6, it says, render to her, Babylon, as also she did render to you, God, and double to her doubles according to her works. In the cup that she did mingle, mingle to her double. Okay, so this is obviously talking about the cup of wrath, and it's saying that this mystery Babylon will be punished with double punishment. So even though this nation, this mystery Babylon, rendered all this disobedience and sin and such unto God, okay, God would render it double back unto this nation. Okay, that's what it's saying. Mingle to her double. Now in Revelation 18:8, it says, because of this, in one day shall come her plagues, death and sorrow and famine, and in fire she shall be utterly burned, because strong is the Lord God who is judging her. And finally, in verse 10, from afar having stood because of the fear of the torment, saying, woe, woe, the great city, Babylon, the strong city, because in 1 hour did come thy judgment. So those are just some quick examples to show that in one day, and actually in 1 hour, but nonetheless, in one day, this final day, this is when the cup of wrath finishes pouring out. And we'll see from later verses that after it finishes pouring out upon that one nation, the wrath is then turned against all the other nations, and Gog and Magog, because they will have risen up against Israel at the arrival of the end day itself. Okay? But I'll get to that in this time. So, quick recap, because recaps are important. I showed verse examples showing God describes a cup of the wine cup of his fury, the wine cup of his wrath. And then some verses from Revelation, which show that on the final day, this cup of wrath is poured out. It finishes pouring out, and it's being poured out upon the mystery Babylon. Okay, so the next point that I have to clarify for everybody, the next fact is that the book of Revelation itself states in two places. Okay, but one most importantly, in one place it states the identity of the mystery Babylon. So it's not really a mystery anymore, so to speak, wordplay, but it says that it's the great city where our Lord and Savior was crucified and buried, where he died. Okay, this was Jerusalem, Israel. So the mystery Babylon of Revelation is none other than Israel. Now, this shouldn't strike anybody as an unbiblical concept, because God himself in the Old Testament compares Israel in verses just like this to Babylon, and sometimes even Tyre. Okay, and even the same terminologies that God uses about Babylon and Tyre, and when he's talking about Israel being like them, the same terms he uses in Revelation here. Okay, so these comparisons are actually biblical in basis. But the mystery Babylon here, the great city, is actually Israel. And now it's not because God hates Israel. Certainly not. God has promised so much to Israel, it will be redeemed, and all of the wonderful blessings that were foretold. But just like the prophet Zechariah said, that in the end days, Gog, Magog, and the nations will mount up to do war against Israel and Jerusalem, and great tragedy will befall Israel at first. But then God and Messiah will arrive suddenly with heavenly fire and brimstone and rock and so forth, and they will wage war and judgment. Okay? So at first, Israel will be assailed, but then it will be redeemed. That's the important part. But it's undeniable that at first, the start of this tragedy, if you want to call it a tragedy, will begin. This final mount of war, if you want to call it that. And then the end itself arrives with the actual arrival of God and Messiah. Okay? So Zechariah warned us about this. So it's not, something that's not unprecedented in the Bible. It was already foretold with Zechariah. So it shouldn't be a shock and surprise to people that God is saying in this specific instance that this great tragedy will befall Israel. But what we can see from the terminology is that it's the cup of wrath. And that's very important because, like I said, this video, this little presentation here is about the cup of wrath verses. Okay? So why is God dispensing wrath upon Israel, and it's terminating and finishing at the end day on the final day itself? Why is this even occurring? Why isn't God just redeeming them? Well, this will blow your mind. But the reason why it's actually taking place is because elsewhere, as I'm about to show, in the scripture, in the prophecy of Isaiah and elsewhere, God foretold that Israel would receive this double portion of punishment. Okay, and as I'll prove, that double period of punishment will be double the period in which they offended God. Okay, so they offended God for 999 years, as I'll prove, and double that is 1998. Okay, being exact and meticulous and not rounding it up. Okay, now what I'm about to reveal is absolutely shocking. Okay, and it's undeniable evidence. Okay, so going on with my presentation here, right? So Jesus died in 26 AD, and we know this from the prophecy of Daniel, because Daniel says that from the decree, which was Artaxerxes, to rebuild Jerusalem, both street and wall, there would be 483 years until Messiah is cut off. Even historians agree and say that 457 BC was the only year that this decree was made, and they have even highlighted and verified that it was and would have been Artaxerxes' famous decree that got Jerusalem rebuilt both street and wall. So since it's a fact that it was 457, when you apply that to the prophecy in chapter 9, it blatantly says that from that decree, you count forward 483 years, and that's the year Messiah dies. That means Messiah, Jesus, died in 26 AD. The amazing thing is that seismologists have verified. These type of things don't happen often where science verifies Bible. But seismologists have verified that they have found proof that there was an earthquake in that region where Jesus died in the year 26 AD. Okay? Now, that's pretty significant. That's pretty impressive and amazing evidence because the Bible claims that there was an earthquake when he died. Okay? Well, it was either at his death or his resurrection, one of the two or both. Okay? But science has now verified that that actually took place. Okay? So Jesus died in 26 AD. Now, Jesus dying marked the point where Israel rejected him and turned him over to the Gentiles to be put to death. Okay, so Israel, the essence is that Israel rejected him and he ended up getting put to death. This is the worst tragedy you could say that could befall Israel, so to speak, because how much worse could it get? I mean, the Messiah came to save everybody, to gather and redeem and all this, but instead he gets rejected. That's an immense tragedy. Okay, now in Matthew 26, verse 39, and this story is paralleled in the Gospels, we get this story of the prayer of Gethsemane. When Jesus was going through the region of Gethsemane with his disciples, and what he did was this little peculiar event where he told them to wait for him. He'd go out and pray in the wilderness, and he came back to them. And most people for 2,000 years have, this has gone in one year and out the other. They just think it's a, insignificant little prayer, nothing super important, and nobody ever really talks about it. But if you look at it like I did, you'll notice that something peculiar happens. Let me just make sure that I think my audio is working fine. Yeah. So, what's up, kitty? What's up? Meow. Meow. You want special blinks? Meow. Just saying hi to the cat. So, in Gethsemane, Jesus did something peculiar, which was he told the disciples to wait and watch for him. He then went away into the wilderness to pray. It was a very important prayer about the cup of wrath, and he was going to hand over the cup of wrath over to God. This is because God is the one who dispenses punishment and such cosmic level justice. Jesus was meant to go to the cross like a lamb. Now, when Jesus was saying these prayers in Gethsemane like this, he was basically marching on to his death. He was going to go on to die. And at the times, the verses, which are paralleled in the Gospels, the story, it relays how Jesus, was distressed. Okay, so this isn't a meaningless or insignificant little prayer. This is a highly significant prayer because Jesus, the Messiah, is about to die, and he's handing over this cup of wrath over to God. Okay, this is highly significant implications, right? So Matthew 26:39, having gone forward a little, he, Jesus, fell on his face, praying and saying, "My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou." Okay? So what we have with this verse is something important. We know that this is taking place in 26 AD, as proven by the prophecy of Daniel. So in 26 AD, Jesus is telling God to take this cup of wrath. Okay? And what is the cup of wrath going to do? And what is about to happen? Jesus, the Messiah, is about to be rejected and die. Okay? That's a very important point I'm about to get into in the next step. All right? Now, moving on. And don't forget the Revelation verses where the cup of wrath is being poured out upon Israel, like I said, for a long period of time, and it finishes on the final day. Okay? And then that wrath is turned over to the nations who have swarmed around Israel. Okay? The cup of wrath then turns to the other nations. All right? The peoples, not nations. Right? So, the There are actually 999 exactly years from the end of King Solomon's reign to the death of Jesus in 26 AD. Okay? Now, in this period of time is when Israel disobeyed God. Okay? So starting from when they had the temple, all right? So this is, we got David and Solomon, they are righteous kings. When Solomon's reign ended, and we can calculate the year that happened based on the numbers provided in the Bible. I got a little breakdown here for everybody. I also have a good breakdown in the first chapter with the biblical chronology all mapped out, all 6,000 years, right? Where you can reference all the numbers, the reigns of the kings and so forth, all in that chapter, right? But a little mathematical breakdown for people here, right? But what we have is after David and Solomon, we then had the next king, Rehoboam. And it says that he was an evil king. And all the way from there, up until the destruction in 587 BC, most of the kings were evil and disobeyed God. So when you look at it from a higher up perspective, right? Like God, if you try to think how would God be looking at this from his type of perspective, you would recognize that you had the first two good kings, they just built the temple. David couldn't build it, so his son Solomon had to build it. David was the first king, Solomon was the second king. Okay, and then after Solomon, it was this long period of disobedience, which ended with the rejection and death of the Messiah. Can't get any worse than that. And right after that came the punishment, which is the fall of the temple in Israel in the start of the near 2,000 years of exile. Excuse me. Right? So from a higher perspective, looking at this, you can see that there's 999 years exactly, because we can calculate how long that period was up until Jesus' death there, right? Because the Bible tells us, and it's in my first chapter of my book, that there are 480 years from the Exodus to the fourth year of King Solomon's reign. It tells us King Solomon reigned for 40 years, okay? We know from the Bible chronology mapped out. We can also do it from reverse mathematics, and either way. But King Solomon, this is 1010 BC. So from then until the fall of Israel in 587, there were 423 years. So from the fourth year of King Solomon's reign until the fall of Israel in 587 BC, if you add up all the numbers that the Bible provides in Genesis, okay, you get the total. It's 423, okay, from the fourth year of King Solomon's reign. So we know that there's 36 remaining years of King Solomon's reign. This means that there's 387 years until 587 BC. Okay, then from there, simple arithmetic. 387 plus 587 plus 26 AD equals 1000. Minus 1 year for 0 gives you the 999 years exactly. Okay, no rounding up, being meticulous and exact. So there are exactly 999 years of the disobedience from the end of King Solomon's reign until the death of Jesus. Okay, so at the death of Jesus, Israel was due to be punished. And God had foretold in the prophecy of Isaiah and also in Revelation that they would receive double punishment for what they had done. So if they had disobeyed for 999 years, they would be punished for 1,998 years, which is double. If we look at the year Jesus died, using that as the logical starting measure for the period of punishment, because that's the end of the period of disobedience, if you take that as the start of the period of punishment, we count forward 1,998 years from 26 AD, we come to 2024 AD, which is the exact year highlighted by the prophecy of Daniel, highlighted by the biblical chronology of 6,000 years, which ends in 2024 AD. It's highlighted by all the other prophecies I cover in this book. Okay? So it's not even just by itself here. It's corroborated, and it corroborates with all of the other biblical prophecies about when the end would occur. The exact same year. Okay? So that double punishment, that double portion of wrath that God would give Israel was that period of near 2,000 years, virtually 2,000 years. Okay? Now we know from Psalm 90, Judaism and Christianity both know. In this psalm, it says that a day with God's like 1,000 years. Christians also know that from the book of Peter, and I think another place, it also says it again somewhere else. So we know 1,000 years is like a day with God. But in Psalm 90, it also says that this period of time, 1,000 years, this divine day, is a watch. Okay? If we go back to the prayer of Jesus in Gethsemane, okay, like I said, he did this peculiar thing. What was the peculiar thing? I forgot to elaborate. What Jesus did was he told his disciples to wait and watch. He went off and made this prayer about handing over this cup of wrath, like I covered. Okay? He was about to die. This is why he's handing over the cup of wrath, because their period of disobedience, the 999 years, was about to come to its end at his death. He was then handing over that cup of wrath to God. Why? Because God was about to render the double portion of wrath unto Israel. Makes perfect logical sense, right? Now, in the Garden of Gethsemane, it highlights that story, which I would say should be called a parable, but everybody's overlooked it. Jesus goes away and has to make that prayer 3 times. And why is Jesus repeating this prayer about the cup of wrath 3 times? Why? Because his disciples kept falling asleep. Why is that important? It happens 3 times in a row, and it's being done to relay something important to us. It's a parable, but everybody's missed it. It's like I'm the only person in the world who's noticed it, right? When Jesus was first with them, he tells them, wait and watch. He goes and makes a prayer about the cup of wrath being handed over to God. He comes back, but his disciples are asleep. Jesus actually rebukes them. Now, why would Jesus rebuke them for being asleep? For some mundane earthly reason? No, probably for a higher reason, but that's reaffirmed because then he says, wait and watch a second time. I'm going to go away for a second. He talks about 3 watches, 2 first watches, and he arrives for a final third one. And that's the final. That final third watch is the end of days. Okay? So you have 2 watches that transpire first, which are 2,000 years. Like Psalm 90 says, a watch is 1,000 years, is a day unto God. So in this parable from Gethsemane, Jesus is showing that there will be these 2 periods of time, okay, altogether where he's not going to be with the people. 2,000 years where Jesus won't be with the people. 2 watches, 2 days. And then he will arrive for a third arrival, a third return, so to speak, according to that parable. So in the parable, like I said, he goes away the first time, says a prayer, comes back, they're asleep, he rebukes them. He goes away a second time, says a prayer, comes back, they're asleep, he rebukes them. He goes away a third time, comes back, and it doesn't repeat the same narration how they were asleep and he rebuked them. So I won't get into the complexity of all that there, but it is different wording. He comes back and says, sleep on henceforth, if you will slumber, or something like that. But what the third arrival is representing is the end of days. He has arrived at the end of days. We know that a lot of people will actually be asleep and will fail. Okay, so what is said there does make sense. Everything lines up and makes perfect sense. These are clearly 2 watches, 2,000 years that would transpire after Jesus' death until the arrival of the end days. Okay, is very, very clear. And we can see from the precise mathematics that it's 2 years shy because it's 999 precisely doubled to 1998, which terminate in 2024, which is corroborated by all the other 7 prophecies from the book, which are from the Bible. Okay, so when I said there are 999 years from the end of King Solomon's reign to the death of Jesus in 26 AD, the period of disobedience plus the period of double wrath, 1998 years, you come to 2024 AD. That is strikingly important. Okay, now next. Soon after Jesus died, Daniel and Jesus both foretold that after Messiah died, that the temple and Israel would fall. This came true according to history. We know this, it's verified history. These things took place 40 years after Jesus died. Both Jesus and Daniel foretold these things would occur soon thereafter the death of Messiah. And in all logical fairness, as we would see, if Messiah is rejected and put to death, that is a very fitting termination and turnover point for the punishment period to begin. So if the punishment, the double period of punishment started, we should look for something along those type of lines to occur. And yes, history verifies some of the worst things that could ever happen, the fall of the temple and Israel, the great exile, everything, all that actually did occur. So everything's lining up and actually looking like it really does make sense, right? This theory, I don't even think is a theory at this point. But anyways, right? So the Tanakh decree that Israel would receive double, which I'm about to read, in return for the straying that they did for the 999 years, as I highlighted, Okay, this one I'm about to get into now. The logical culmination point, like I said, would be the death of the Messiah in 26 AD. Okay, this would be the two. I already said all this, right? So in this would be the 2 days or 2,000 years, which is referenced in Hosea 6:2. Okay, this is another famous prophecy, like Psalm 90, that Judaism and Christianity both say is, revealing great, powerful things. This one here about the Messiah. So in Hosea 6:2, it says, He does revive us after 2 days, which is 2,000 years. In the third day, which means at the arrival of the third thousandth year, the third millennia, He does raise us up and we live before him. Okay? Now, this is important. Judaism and Christianity understand this to mean that this is indicating when the Messiah would come. It would raise us up, indicates the resurrection and even the subsequent rapture for all those who will be raptured up. Okay, so he revives us after 2 days. That also is an allusion to the resurrection, translation, and the rapture. Okay, it's the end of all the mortal suffering. It's the redemption and all of that. Okay, so he revives us after 2,000 years. And in the third day, so at the start of the third day, he does raise us up. Okay, so right here we can see that is a perfect fit. That fits perfectly into the revelations that I've just disclosed. Okay, Messiah dies 26 AD. We then know that we have that double period of punishment, 1,998 years. It takes us to 2024. That'll be the 2 days, the 2 watches over with. So it connects so many different biblical prophecies. It connects Psalms. It connects the prophecy of Isaiah. It connects the prayer of Jesus. In Gethsemane, it connects all these various different things. Okay, and the prophecy of Hosea. All of these are connected. So my next point that I want to cover is, so what justification do we have to start the measure of double punishment from 26 AD? Smart people paying attention be like, but what justification do you have? Well, here you go. From Isaiah 40. This is what I discovered and what I put into one of the chapters of my book here. In Isaiah 40 and later in Isaiah chapter 51, we see verification of all of this. It's astounding. In Isaiah 4, so let's do a quick recap, right? God has his cup of fury, cup of wrath, that is poured out on disobedient nations, whether they be Israel or not. God shows in Revelation that on the final day, when God and Messiah arrive to punish the world, that Israel itself will receive the last and most potent drops of this wrath. But that this wrath will then be will be turned upon the nations, and Israel will be redeemed. So her time of punishment will end on this final day, and she will be redeemed while the rest and the wicked are punished. Okay, just to make that clear. All right, but this cup of wrath will be finished pouring out on the final day. That was established from those verses. Okay, and then we see, like I showed in Matthew 26, an example with Jesus's prayer by handing over the cup, which is what he said before his death in 26 AD. Okay, then I explained how there were 999 years of disobedience from the end of King Solomon's reign until the death of the Messiah. And then from there's exactly 1,998 years to 2024, which, by the way, is the same year, according to the prophecy of Daniel, the chronology of 6,000 years, which ends in 2024, and other various prophecies that I detail in the book. Okay, so we've got all that build up here, right? And like I said, so what justification, though, do we have to take the measure of double time from 26 AD itself? Why not some other time, right? Isaiah 40, verse 2, it says, and by the way, this is one of the only 2 mentions. So Isaiah 40, okay, is one of only 2 mentions in the whole Bible. The other one is Revelation that I already read up here, okay? In the whole Bible, only 2 verses where it mentions double of anything in regards to wrath or punishment. There's only 22 uses of the word double to start with in the whole Bible. I've gone through that list a bunch of times. Only 2 are relevant to punishment. So the only 2 mentions in the Bible about double in regards to punishment like this are verses that talk about Israel receiving double punishment. So that verifies the theory. But anyways, in Isaiah 40, it says, "Speak to the heart of Jerusalem and call to her that her warfare has been completed, that accepted has been her punishment, that she has received from the hand of God double for all her sins." This is a reference to that final day when the double period of punishment has come to its culmination. Okay? So keep that in mind when you hear this prophecy, right? Speak to the heart of Jerusalem and call to her, because her redemption's about to come. Oh, the big bad tragedy that Zechariah foretold would come at the arrival of the end, that will initially happen, and the armies of the world and Gog Magog will mount up for war against Israel. But even though that initial badness will happen, Israel will then go on to be redeemed, and the wicked will be judged and punished. Okay, so keep all that in mind, right, Kitty? Yes, Kitty agrees. So speak to the heart of Jerusalem and call to her that her warfare has been completed, that accepted has been her punishment, that she has received from the hand of God double for all her sins. A voice is crying in a wilderness, prepare ye the way of God, make straight in the desert a highway to our God. Every valley is raised up, and every mountain and hill become low. These things are said to only occur at the end of days, when God and Messiah arrive. All the mountains will be made flat. Everybody knows those verses. That's Old and New Testament, right? Even the book of Enoch, first Enoch. Okay, so this is talking about the arrival of Messiah. And what do you know? It's got the famous verses that we all know as Christians are about Jesus. They reference the prophecy of Malachi in the arrival of Messiah in general, right? Prepare ye the way of God, make straight in the desert the highway to our God. We know that this is referencing Jesus, the Messiah. Okay, so this is Isaiah 40, and it's saying all this, right? That Israel will receive from the hand of God double for all her sins. So that's not my invention. The Bible says that. Okay, a voice is crying in a wilderness, prepare ye the way of God. And isn't it ironic that this double period of punishment starts at the death of Jesus? So he came in his first coming, where John announced him as per the prophecy of Malachi. So it starts with Jesus, double period of punishment, and then Jesus returns to the earth. So it's like Jesus, the double punishment, then Jesus. That's the timing here. Quite striking and fitting, right? So it says that she has received from the hand of God double for all her sins. Voices crying in the wilderness, prepare ye the way of God, make straight in the desert highway to our God. Every valley is raised up, every mountain and hill become low, and crooked places become a plain, and the entangled places a valley. And revealed has been the honor of God, and seen it have all flesh together. From the mouth of God has spoken. See, Kitty seconds that. Isn't that right, Kitty? Now, going on. So, the same prophet, Isaiah, okay, later in chapter 51, says the following. He identifies the end days as when Israel stops drinking from the cup of wrath. Okay? Now, even though Israel is initially suffering, like I said, at the start of the end day, because the army's mounting up against it, and certain bad things, like Zechariah says, will start, okay, its period of punishment is culminating at this final end day point. Okay, and the final wrath of God from that cup of wrath will be averted from Israel unto the hordes of Gog Magog. Okay, so that's what's going to happen, and that's what it says. All right, so in Isaiah 51:3, for God has comforted Zion, he has comforted all her wastes, and he setteth her wilderness as Eden. So this is about the transformation. This is talking about her redemption. Okay, so this is after the bad is finished ending and her redemption, right? He setteth her wilderness as Eden, and her desert as a garden of God. Joy, yea, gladness is found in her, confession in the voice of song. Then in verse 6, lift ye up to the heavens your eyes, and look attentively unto the earth beneath, for the heavens as smoke have vanished, and the earth as a garment weareth out, and its inhabitants as gnats do die. And my salvation is to the age, and my righteousness is not broken. And then in verse 11, and the ransomed of God turn back, and they have come to Zion with singing, and joy age during is on their head. Gladness and joy they attain, fled away of sorrow and sighing. Then in verse 17, stir thyself, rise, Jerusalem. Who has drunk from the hand of God the cup of his fury? The goblet, the cup of trembling, thou hast drunk, thou hast wrung out, meaning the last drop has come out. So you got right here. Oh, sorry, and another verse. A few more. Verse 22. See, Kitty says there's more verses to read, right, Kitty? Verse 22. Thus said the Lord God and thy God, he pleadeth for his people. Lo, I have taken out of thy hand the cup of trembling, the goblet, the cup of my fury. Thou dost not add to drink it anymore. When is God saying this? At the redemption at the end of days. So they will stop drinking it. So everything I just said is verified, right? In verse 23, and I've put it into the hand of those afflicting thee. So like I said, Gog, Magog, the nations, we know from the various prophecies, Old and New Testament, they mount up for war against Israel. The last drops of wrath are poured out upon Israel. Their period of punishment's over. It's time for them to receive redemption. And that cup of wrath is turned against the nations, right? And I put it into the hand of those afflicting thee. Okay. Now in Zephaniah 3:8, it says, therefore, wait for me. Another instruction, one of the few instructions from God to wait for his arrival. Therefore, just like in Daniel 12, where he reveals the time of the end days, which is 2024, he says, blessed are those who are waiting earnestly and do come to the days, the years, the 1335th. You go on to your lot at the end of days, right? It says here, therefore, wait for me. This is an instruction from God. Wait for me. Wait for his arrival. How do you wait for his arrival unless you know when it's going to happen? Right? So therefore, wait for me, an affirmation of God, for the day of my rising for prey, for my judgment is to gather nations, to assemble kingdoms, to pour out on them mine indignation, all the heat of mine anger, for by the fire of my jealousy consumed is all the earth. Okay? Pour out on them mine indignation, all the heat of my anger. This is pouring out the wrath. So this Zephaniah verse is referencing what Isaiah said in 51. Okay? Now, so I have covered everything there. That's all the material, but a quick recap for anybody, right? We have the cup of wrath. Okay, I don't need to read the stuff anymore. I just do it from memory. So, quick recap. Israel finally got its temple. They had David and Solomon, righteous kings, pleased God. But at the end of King Solomon was the start of the period of disobedience. That period of disobedience lasted 999 years. And it ended with the death of the Messiah, as Daniel foretold and calculated, precise year. At this point here, God then rendered unto her double for her sins, as the verses have said, meaning 1,998 years. Okay? And even if the first period was 1,000, that just still verifies it. Nothing changes anything, just verifies it just the same. Right? But 1,998 years from the death of Jesus marks 2024. Okay? It's very, very clear. Like I said, lines up with the prayer at Gethsemane, where Jesus revealed there would be two watches. Psalm 90 says a watch is 1,000 years. There are 2,000 years from when Jesus died until his final return at that third and final watch. Okay? That is referenced in that parable. Okay? The prophecy of Hosea ties into all of this as well. After 2 days, after 2,000 years, you will be healed. You will be raised up. Wow, I got like this little spiritual emotion there, bro. So I'm sorry, folks, but this is astounding evidence. This is standalone evidence. I know it took a little while to read, but this is critically important stuff. When you're reading Revelation and you're hearing about this wrath, this cup of wrath with that double portion that is finishing being poured out upon Israel, it says that in Revelation. And Isaiah said that Israel received that double portion of punishment. You can see, folks, it's all right there. None of this is imaginary. This is bona fide, genuine, rock solid, home run hitter, solid discovery. This needs to be appreciated by all Christians, by all the churches. It needs to be spread, needs to be heard. Okay. One way you can help do that is go to Amazon, get my book. It's only $11, 11 cents, 1111, The Rapture. Okay. Help make it happen. Okay. Help spread the awareness. All right. 1111. Help make it happen for yourself, is what I meant, for your soul. Okay, prepare yourself. The whole point of the parable in the Gethsemane story was that each time Jesus came back, the disciples had fallen asleep. They slumbered. They weren't ready and waiting and watching. He instructed them to be ready, waiting, and watching, but they weren't. He rebuked them for falling asleep. Paul says elsewhere in the scripture, and I've got it in my book there. Okay, he says that we, brethren, the true Christians, will not be asleep like the others. When the Lord arrives, we will not be caught by surprise like a thief. We will be awake, ready, waiting, and watching. Okay? That is why when Jesus returned from his watches, from his prayers, he rebuked the disciples for falling asleep because they did not listen to his instruction to be ready, waiting, and watching. We see from Daniel 12, God gave instruction. Blessed is he who waiteth earnestly for that final year, the 1335th, which is 2024. We see Zephaniah, God's instruction. Therefore, wait for me, for his arrival. We have instruction from God. We have calculation from God. We have a lot of calculations from God of when it's going to be. And all of the calculations that God provided in his biblical prophecies, all 7 of them, okay, they all point to 2024. All right? Don't be deceived because we're a few months into the year. Don't be deceived. What has happened and what has taken place in Israel in the last few months, okay, is a perfect example of how Gog Magog and its armies and the beast kingdom and the nations, all the opponents, all of them will gang up against Israel. We could see it starting to unfold now in the news. The atrocious attack on Israel that started all of this and everything else, right? So don't say I didn't warn you. We also have the Corona Borealis supernova, which will be visible to the world, be visible to the human eye, to the naked eye. No need of binoculars. It may be bright enough to look like a small sun in the sky, possibly, but it will be visible as bright as the pole star at least. Okay, which I believe is Polaris. So, anyways, don't say I didn't warn you, folks. God bless you all. Everybody, take care. But if you do go to Amazon, if you do get my book, extra $23, you get systematic theology that Jesus gave when he was here on earth. Okay, like the title says, the systematic theology, Christology, theodicy, and apologetics of the original and true Christianity, scripturally proven. Okay, correcting the apostasy of modern Christianity. $23, so you know the true deal, the true gospel. Okay, you got to reform to be saved. Don't say I didn't warn you. You don't believe me? Go look in Revelation, like it shows in the book. Jesus warned all the churches except for one to reform, or else they'd be in serious trouble when he arrives. The only church he didn't tell to reform is obviously the one assembly that didn't need to reform because they were reforming. Reformation is what you need. Don't say I didn't warn you. Anyways, God bless you all, folks. Everybody take care.